It is September 1504, and the most important square in Florence, Piazza della Signoria, is witnessing an extraordinary event. A statue of David, more than 5 meters high, created by the then 29-year-old sculptor Michelangelo Buonarroti, is unveiled here. Everything about that statue is unique. It was created from a damaged marble block that was quarried 40 years ago, and has been lying in front of Florence Cathedral ever since. During that time, 2 sculptors were approached in turn to try to make a larger-than-life statue out of it, but both refused because of the irregular shape and flaws in the stone. It wasn't until Michelangelo accepted the task. He made hundreds of sketches. He had to measure the block to centimeters to see exactly the final form of the statue long before he began to work the stone. He also had to bend one arm of the statue because the size and shape of the block would not be enough. He worked on his David for 2.5 years. When he was finished, this 9-ton creation had to be moved for 4 days to the Piazza della Signoria, which a special commission including famous painters Leonardo da Vinci and Sandro Botticelli chose as the most suitable place for its placement. David thus became the first freestanding marble statue since antiquity. But above all, Michelangelo's statue was, and still is, the greatest celebration of the ideals of the Renaissance. An artistic style that was born at the turn of the 14th and 15th centuries, and, after a long period when art could only glorify God and faith, turned again to man and to the ideals of beauty as they applied in ancient Greece and Rome. However, what made Michelangelo's work perhaps the most famous sculpture of all time was not just its perfect physical beauty. It was as if he could wrest even the soul from the marble. We see a young man, originally a poor shepherd, at the moment when he knows he is ready to accept his task and become king of Israel. The 8th of September, when the statue of David could be seen for the first time by the citizens of Florence, definitely confirmed Michelangelo Buonarroti as the greatest sculptor of his time. At that moment, he could not yet have known that one day he would create equally significant works in the field of painting and architecture, as he did in his sculpture workshop. Michelangelo was born in 1475 into a noble but impoverished family. Later, when he will earn money that other artists of the time could never dream of, he will financially help his father. His mother died when he was 6, and his 4 brothers. He spent a large part of his childhood in a masonry workshop together with his nanny's family. Even then, he dreamed of becoming an artist, but his father's idea was different. He wanted him to be a lawyer or a businessman. Everything was decided when Michelangelo was 13. Then a friend brought him to one of the most famous art workshops in Florence, and when they saw the boy's talent, they offered him a 3-year contract. This eventually softened his father. At the age of 15, a whole new world opened up for Michelangelo. The then ruler of Florence, Lorenzo the Magnificent of the Medici family, who was a great connoisseur and lover of art, noticed a young man who already showed signs of genius. He brought him to his palace, where Michelangelo became almost a member of his family, and where he was able to discover the greatest works of art and develop his talent. In 1492, however, Lorenzo dies, and the 17-year-old Michelangelo leaves the Medici court. 2 years later, the fanatical monk Girolamo Savonarola takes control of the city, and the Medici are expelled from Florence. Michelangelo works alternately in Florence, Bologna, and Rome, creates some magnificent works. But it was this sculpture he created in the Vatican in the last years of the 15th century that brought him boundless admiration. It is called Pietà, Italian for compassion or pity, and depicts the despairing Mother of God with the lifeless body of Jesus taken down from the cross. It is a strange combination of 2 ideals, of ancient beauty and Christian purity of spirit. All this is enhanced by the fact that the Madonna, supposedly inspired by a childhood memory of Michelangelo's mother, looks much younger than her tortured son. Michelangelo earned 450 gold ducats for the Pieta, and secured both fame and other lucrative commissions. Now 25, he would work until his death for the richest clients imaginable at the time: the Pope and other high church dignitaries, the Medici family that regained control of Florence in the 16th century, and the Florentine Republic. However, the absolute highlight was the task assigned to him in 1508 by Pope Julius II. At the time, Michelangelo had already been working on his monumental tombstone, actually a 3-story mausoleum, which was to be decorated with 40 life-size statues. But in 1508, Michelangelo was 33 at the time. The Pope ordered the work to stop and came up with a new commission: to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, which had been built 30 years earlier by Julius's uncle, Pope Sixtus IV. It's literally an insane task. Michelangelo, who always stressed that he was not a painter, is to paint the 1,000 square meters of the vaulted ceiling, which is 20 meters above the ground. The Pope's original request was for 12 figures of the apostles, but Michelangelo decided to take a different approach: to create a monumental set of paintings, starting with the creation of the world and man, and ending with Noah and the flood of the world. It is a work of genius that creates the illusion of walls rising up to the sky, and the motif of the creation of man, where God awakens life in Adam by the touch of his hand, is still one of the most famous paintings of all time. As breathtaking as the result of Michelangelo's work is, the creation of the work itself was one big ordeal. The artist had to paint from a scaffolding, often lying down, in wet plaster that was not allowed to shrink under his hands, because then it would not hold the right colors. The only way to correct mistakes was to scrape off the entire plaster and start again. The painting technology alone was extremely demanding. Added to all this was Michelangelo's wild nature. He longed for perfection, was not satisfied with anything, often destroyed a painting that others thought was perfect. He was obsessed with his work, living in miserable conditions, shunning almost all people except his helpers. He ate poorly, was practically unwashed, often stayed alone in the cold and damp chapel, worked through the night, and lit candles attached to his hat. On several occasions he found himself totally exhausted, even quarreling with the Pope and wanting to quit his job. But he always came back and finally created a work that made the Pope, a great connoisseur of art, ecstatic. This also allowed Michelangelo to get away with controversial scenes. A flood of naked figures, or even a depiction of God with a bare background. There are other interesting things here, like female figures with obviously masculine, muscular bodies. This was related to Michelangelo's belief that the true bearer of beauty is primarily the male body. He himself never lived with a woman, and scholars sometimes speculate about his homosexuality, but there is no direct evidence. And so Michelangelo is presented as a man for whom his art was far more important than any relationship. At the time of the completion of the Sistine Chapel ceiling, Michelangelo was only 37 years old, and he still had more than half a century of creative work ahead of him. In 1536, shortly after his 60th birthday, for example, he returned to the Sistine Chapel to paint the altar wall with the Last Judgment fresco. It took him 7 more years. It is as magnificent as the ceiling of the chapel, and if it was intended as a warning to sinners at the beginning of Reformation, it was a very impressive warning. Michelangelo was a sculptor who turned out to be a greater painter than most of his contemporaries. And to make matters better, he also left his indelible mark on the world of architecture. In his old age, when he was 72, until his death, he was the chief architect of the emerging St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, the centerpiece of the Catholic world. During his tenure, the central space of the cathedral and the majestic dome that is still a safe landmark of St. Peter's Cathedral were created. Michelangelo Buonarroti died in Rome in February 1564. He was 88 years old. He left behind a stunning body of work, true treasures of Renaissance art. He did not have a cheerful personal life, but what he wanted most was given to him in spades. For 3/4 of a century, he had been creating beauty in such a pure form that even today, 500 years later, he is considered one of the greatest artists of all time.